The Geopolitics and Empire podcast is joined by journalist and researcher Paolo Sorbello, who was living in Kazakhstan. He holds a PhD from the University of Glasgow, where he studied international relations in Kazakhstan's oil sector, and he is a research fellow at Ca' Foscari University in Venice. How is life, Paolo, in Italy, Kazakhstan, wherever you may be?
Hi, Roger. I'm in Italy right now on vacation. I normally live in Almaty, in Kazakhstan, life was quite tough for the past 10 days, 12 days, just because of the events in the country.
Yeah, just crazy. You go on vacation and look what happens. And I guess from Italy, you're sipping on some espressos, cappuccinos, and observing events from there. Will you be going back to Kazakhstan this year?
Yeah, I will be going back. That's the place I call home. So that's where I'll be going back soon.
All right. So far, we've been hearing a lot of reports of what's going on in Kazakhstan. Different narratives, different stories that Kazakhs revolted against the government due to the higher energy prices, which I think is in the general, background context of a poor economy. And we're seeing high inflation right now as well in many countries. And I've been following food prices because I used to live in Kazakhstan, and over the past 2 years, I've been seeing food prices for certain items jump 10% and even to 50%. Some have also said that the COVID restrictions and mandates have further added fuel to the fire economically. Some have pointed to an internal coup, an inter-elite rivalry between Nazarbayev, Tokayev, and possibly others. And last but not least, some analysts have described a foreign intervention by USA, UK, EU, Turkey. Can you tell us, to the best of your ability, having lived in Kazakhstan for many years, what do you think is going on in Kazakhstan?
What is going on has to do a lot with inequality and lack of representation. The violence that emerged after the protests that were driven by these socioeconomic issues, that has to do with something that we don't actually know. And I think it would be difficult to pinpoint to one specific answer and say, this is the reason and nothing else. Also because right now, for example, the official line has two competing and somehow contradictory versions. Both the head of the security service was arrested and charged with treason, and there's a plot with 20,000 foreign trained, highly trained people who took Almaty by storm. So which one is it? Is it a coup by Massimov and his cronies, or is it foreign intervention? In this sense, it also shows that the narrative, even the official narrative, has changed over time, and so that shows that we, as the general public who are not behind the scenes, for us, it's going to be really hard to actually know the details of the violence that happened in Almaty from the night of the 4th onwards. For what concerned the protest, as you mentioned, the inflation was in the fuel prices in Mangistau, in the west of the country, was the prime mover, let's say. But as you also mentioned, it's been 2 full years of COVID restrictions, and it's been 2 years of progressively decreasing standards of life, inflation galloping. There was a pension fund reform recently that hit also the purchasing power of people. And in general, jobs are getting more precarious, and people are essentially getting increasingly fed up. And also they see all of these decisions to, for example, double the price of fuel as external. They don't have a chance to say, look, we don't like the fact that you just doubled my fuel price, so the next election, we will vote you out. That's not an option, because the governors of the region are named by the president. The president is elected in very questionable elections, as we've seen by all observers in the past 30 years of independent Kazakhstan. So this is a mix of dissatisfaction in terms of socioeconomic status and also freedoms of expression for people.
I recall when I was in Kazakhstan, the KNB had actually politely inquired about me, and I'm like, after seeing the KNB head arrested, I'm like, why are you worrying about me, some foreigner in Kazakhstan? You should be worrying about your chief in charge of the KNB. But I wanted to ask about the COVID restriction, just briefly. Like, what is it like? I've been hearing now at my former place of employment, you can't work unless you're vaccinated, and now they have an app where it controls entry into a lot of places. And I've heard that primarily in Nur Sultan, I don't know if they're going back to calling it Astana or Nur Sultan and Almaty. For many places, you need the QR code Ashuk app to enter. But I've heard outside, like in most other smaller cities, no one's asking for it. So, I mean, in general, what are the COVID restrictions like, and what do people say about them, Kazakhs?
Well, there were in the origin in March 2020. There was a quite long lockdown. The country's borders were closed, so there was no more tourism, no more short-term business visits, and only now it's reopening. So it's pretty much 20 months of being shut down from the rest of the world in order to avoid an influx of people that it would be hard to control in terms of the virus. Then people were given this app to enter, which restricted according to the waves of the infection, they restricted entry into, for example, malls or stadiums or or restaurants. For example, in malls in the weekend, it's essentially harder to get in if you don't have the green status. But that's not actually the main issue. The main issue is not the actual restrictions, but also the lost revenue from a lot of companies, which translated in the summer 2020 into 4 million people out of an active population of 8 million people that work. 4 million people lost their jobs. That doesn't mean that they, lost their jobs and they didn't find something else to do, but that means that the security they used to have translated into a less secure, more precarious occupation. Some people started doing taxi driving. Some people started delivering food, which boomed obviously with the lockdown restrictions. So we've seen it, in the apartments when you ordered food. The people that would come would be teachers or people who had master's degrees, spoke English, or people from the countryside that didn't speak any word of Russian, for example. And so, in that sense, it was quite striking to see how everybody all of a sudden, after this cataclysmic pandemic hit the economy of Kazakhstan. Everybody started struggling for the crumbs that were left in the normal life of the country.
So, talking to some of my Kazakh Russian friends out there, some of them have no idea what's going on. They were told maybe they live on the outskirts of the city or in smaller cities or towns in Kazakhstan, and they were like, we were just told to stay home. We're staying home. We don't know what's going on out there. Other friends have told me that in the plazas of some of the cities, that there were peaceful Kazakh protesters, that they were generally sparked by, as you said, the prices, and that, they were having signs and they were just peacefully protesting there. So in the beginning, that's what we saw, right? Just average Kazakh citizens protesting, no?
Absolutely. And it was, the scale of it was unprecedented because we have seen several protests in certain squares, in certain cities, scattered every once in a while. But that spiraled from, the small oil town of Zhanaozen to Aktau, to Atirau, to Uralsk, and then from the west of the country moved all across the vast territory of Kazakhstan, which is one of the largest countries in the world, and spiraled by social media, by communication, and mostly solidarity. And the reason that there was solidarity was because the original protest was not just about the price. It was also about the fact that it resonated with the people, because it was about inequality. It was about the fact that people were marginalized from the economic gains for such a long time.
And so now, moving from the peaceful to the violent now, there were reports of beheadings, bombings, arson, the looting. I know you said, as you said, it's hard to figure out what's going on, but how would you begin to explain where did all of this come from? Because some of that stuff does seem like that it wouldn't come from the domestic population. It seemed pretty extreme. So can you, verify some of these reports, and, who do you think would be behind this?
Who do I think would be behind is one of those $1 million questions. I don't want to go into a speculation and say who was or who wasn't. What I know from several different accounts from several different people in Almaty is that, and those are people are eyewitnesses, is that the mass was huge, massive, but of people. But in the actuality, it wasn't coordinated. So some of them followed the peaceful activists, and then once the peaceful activists were rejected by the special forces, the peaceful activists left, and the more violent groups kept fighting against the police. Some of them came the next day, on the 5th of January, from outside of the city, which should have been cordoned. So somebody let them in, which fuels the conspiracies. But again, these various groups, and then a criminal group of Diki Arman, this savage Arman, so-called criminal boss, was there too. So people with better weapons were there. People with just knives and sticks were there. The way that they actually set on fire the municipal building and the presidential residence, and the way they looted it, with the videos that we saw from those places, obviously not live, but broadcasted later, those show how unprepared the city administration was, and also how unprepared they were, the same looters and the same more violent writers, because they didn't know what to do. They stole weapons from the police, and you see in certain instances, this gun going off, scaring the person that was carrying it, because he doesn't know how to use a gun, and this kind of goes against this theory by the leadership right now, which these are highly trained forces from the Middle East and Afghanistan and other parts of Central Asia. Well, if they were highly trained, it wouldn't have lasted 1 day and a half, right? It would have been, and if there was an involvement from the special security forces that were all together, that for sure wouldn't have been just a 1 day and a half kind of cleanup of the looters. It would have been much more of a kind of a urban war. And then the most important thing is that then the peaceful protesters already targeted in the first day, they then either went home or were under detention. So putting the blame on them is quite senseless and baseless. I've spoken to some people also today, and they told me we had to leave. We were detained, we were questioned, and then we were told, if you want to go out again, we can let you out, but you have to leave your phone here, which means that they were not able to, allegedly, organize or send people here or there. They were, they left and they went home because they were scared, because they had just been confronted by people with helmets and guns and soldiers that were essentially pushing back against them.
So then, to look at the power structure, then we've got we have the Nazarbayev who's been in power, who we can say, I guess, he's been and still in power for 30 years, and the Nazarbayev club or clan, his children and relatives and his whole group, and then you've got Tokayev, and then I don't know if there are other elite factions. So, what can you tell us? What's going on now between the Nazarbayev clan and Tokayev? Some people are saying that Tokayev was trying to clean up the Nazarbayev corruption. I think I was reading in some reports that some people were chanting, protesters were saying that we support Tokayev and we want Tokayev to clean up the corruption. So that some people say it was kind of like a coup of Tokayev against Nazarbayev, or maybe they're still just both working together, Nazarbayev and Tokayev. What can you tell us about that?
Well, if I had to bet, I would bet that both Tokayev and Nazarbayev are too wise to provoke such urban violence. So I would hope that it wasn't them, giving the order one way or the other, and I wouldn't assume so. There might be, as you said, clans close to them from one side or the other who were somewhat responsible for either a bit of the violence or some power struggle around it. But that's really not possible to determine. What we can know is, okay, now we see that Tokayev sidelined and completely ostracized Masimov, who is now, enemy number one, in prison, charged with treason. So now he's done. But Nazarbayev, through his own press secretary, came out saying in support of Tokayev and his speeches. Part of the businesses that were owned by Alia Nazarbayeva were targeted explicitly by Tokayev in his speech of January 11th. But that was already out in the open. We all knew it's in the press, it's everywhere, that this was a corrupt scheme that the law enforcement should have investigated. And so everyone knew. And so in my opinion, that's kind of an easy target to sell to the people, saying like, look, we're cleaning up, we're tackling corruption, and you the first thing you tackle, and who knows, maybe the last, is something that we all knew already that is corrupt. Because then he named the government, and the team of the government is essentially the same as before, with small changes. For example, the Minister of Internal Affairs, who's responsible for the police, for example, and so could have been the scapegoat in saying, okay, the police lost control of Almaty, so you should pay. He is confirmed, and he was minister before, and he was minister under Nazarbayev as well. So to me, that's a sign of continuity. That's also a sign of continuity, the fact that the main businesses of the Nazarbayev constellation of elites remain still untouched. So in a sense, I don't see this kind of clear-cut conflict between Tokayev, who is a product of the Nazarbayev system, and Nazarbayev. Sure, we haven't seen Nazarbayev out in the open. We haven't seen him shake hands with Tokayev. But also we haven't seen him, fleeing the country and condemning Tokayev for this power move. That's the other thing. If it were a coup, it would have been claimed by somebody. If it were an Islamist coup or an Islamist attack or a terrorist attack, there would have been a terrorist organization taking charge of it. We've seen it all the time across the world, and we haven't seen it in Kazakhstan. Why? So that's why we're lacking answers.
Yeah, so there have been reports that the Nazarbayev club had fled Kazakhstan, and that you don't think that Nazarbayev team is going to lose power. So you think it's just the same is continuing, where it's the Nazarbayev and the Tokayev together. I mean, just essentially nothing has really changed, you think?
Well, it probably won't win from this, absolutely. But we, as long as the billions are not targeted, but the millions, but we're talking about millions, then I don't see a change. I function. My analysis functions through a lens that is also economic, and so if the main business interests are not touched, then I don't see that big of a change. Obviously, the power ministries and all these personnel moves helped Tokayev gain power. Now there's a new head of the KNB, the security service, which obviously is now more loyal to Tokayev. There are more ministers that are essentially his product, but we also see old-fashioned Nazarbayev era ministers keeping their post.
Well, what would you make of what the Chinese and Russians, I don't know who else has repeated this, but Putin, I think, came out and declared that this was a color revolution or foreign-sponsored regime change. As you mentioned, Tokayev said it was a coup, but he didn't really give any specifics, and then he later kind of changed the story. And the Chinese, basically the Chinese have also said what the Russians said, that it was a color revolution. Do you have any comment on their comments?
Well, yeah, if that was a press conference, my follow-up question to Putin and to the minister in China would be, which color is it? Who is behind it? All the color revolutions that we've seen have a leader, whether that's like the next authoritarian leader, or it's a democratic leader, or is a populist, whichever has a leader, a movement, a recognizable, maybe non-institutionalized, but a recognizable and organized group of people. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen that kind of response. And it's also obviously very convenient to frame it that way in order to justify the deployment of troops, of foreign troops, the fact that the repression was so harsh. Tokayev couldn't have said, I'm shooting. I ordered the army to shoot at people without warning. If the sovereignty of the country wasn't at stake, right? And that could not have been justified, even though we know that the government of Kazakhstan has in the past ordered the police and the special forces to open fire against unarmed protesters.
Do you think Kazakhstan will go back to the stability that it has enjoyed for the past decade or two, or do you think it's going to be a bit unstable from here on out, and with the potential for things to fall apart again like it did? What does the near future hold for Kazakhstan?
Well, I hope in general that stability will be in place. That's because that's something that is out of control from the people. So it's not up to the people to maintain stability in a country so vertically oriented and so controlled from the top as Kazakhstan. But at the same time, I'm fearing, like many others, that freedoms will be targeted and restricted further, which is a statement that has a lot of weight, because already in Kazakhstan before this January, freedoms and the possibility of people to express themselves and to voice their dissent was very little. So now the space will be even smaller, and many journalists are already being targeted as we speak, especially in the region, like you mentioned, in the small squares of the peripheral regions, peripheral cities, where the peaceful protests happen on the 3rd and the 4th of January. A lot of the journalists right now are being questioned by the police. A lot of journalists have been arrested for having violated the curfew or the law on peaceful assembly. So this is the fear from many human rights activists and many activists as well.
Yeah, tell me about it. When I was there, my email is blocked in Kazakhstan, the email that I use, and I had to go through like 3 VPNs that I guess the government kept blocking the VPN services. Do you think Kazakhstan up until now has had a multi-vector approach in everything, foreign policy and, balancing between China, Russia, the EU, United States? After what occurred with the CSTO and, Tokayev calling up Putin for assistance, do you think the multi-vector approach will continue, or do you think Kazakhstan has now moved closer to Russia?
I mean, you were in Semey. You know that in the north of Kazakhstan, there's quite a lot of influence from Russia, but also we know that Nazarbayev was a very good friend, politically with Putin. Tokayev is from the same kind of environment, also very close. Russia has always had a lot of influence on Kazakhstan. And so I don't think that will necessarily change after the deployment of the troops, because also the troops are already leaving as we speak. But at the same time, it was the most logical first call. When you are in trouble, you have to call your best friend to help you. So you don't call China, which is a new friend. You don't call the EU or the EU member states or the US because they're far away, only interested in business. So you call Russia, which has a military that is ready to be deployed, and probably you had a previous phone call before the official call saying, "Will you come if I call you?" And so that was kind of like the stamp of approval from Putin. Which now has, let's say, an open check with Tokayev, but I don't believe that he will ever cash it, because I don't think it serves any purpose for Russia to get back what they gave, because now they can always say, "Well, Tokayev, you're there for us, so keep thanking us. Don't go out of line," and that's pretty much it. There's not going to be a concession of land or a concession of sovereignty in terms of the army. There's not going to be a battalion deployed constantly in Kazakhstan. I don't think that's going to be a case. There might be small deals in which Russian businessmen are preferred to other businessmen, but I don't believe that the general geopolitical picture changed. And Kazakhstan obviously will continue to be multivectoral, because that's the only option they've always had. Besides, going the neutral Turkmenistan way, which is like very close to the outside world and only allows the few selected people in. So in this sense, China was very happy that Russia and the CSTO member states also intervened, because that meant that the security issue that was emerging in Kazakhstan was dealt with by other people. And so they enjoyed the return into stability without spending a penny. And the same can be said of European states and United States. They all watched from afar, very worried, as they always are when there's a conflict. But they were quite happy behind the scenes, I think, when the situation now is back to normal. People are walking the streets. Businesses are reopening, cleaning up the mess from the riots, and life can start again as usual.
I've heard some fantastical statements saying that, talking about the possibility of, where the larger Russian population is situated in the north, that, that it would break apart from Kazakhstan and reintegrate with Russia, these kinds of things. And I just don't see that at all in the realm of possibility, because, I mean, from living there, it seems like not even the Russians there would be interested in that. Like, they have a hard enough time just trying to make ends meet economically. As you're saying, I think most people's preoccupation is just living life and dealing with the economic aspect. No?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if they wanted to, they could just go to Russia. I don't think that in that sense they feel such a extremely different loyalty and affiliation and national identity. It's the in a way that it's beautiful to go deep and analyze and discover the multi-layered national identity in this part of the world, because so many different elements happened. But that's not to orientalize them. It's the same for me. I'm from Sicily, and Sicily was conquered by Spanish, the Arabs, the French. So in that sense, we also have everyone in the world has a quite layered national identity, and this is a testimony of the fact that it's not just clear cut. After you pass the border between Kazakhstan and Russia, you switch off something in your brain and something changes. The history of Central Asia and of Kazakhstan and Russia in particular has so many layers that I don't think that with a blink of an eye you can just change borders and also affiliations and also the people's sentiment. So I don't think, again, like you said, that this is in the realm of possibilities, and that is convenient to anybody also, like who benefits from that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. With the conversations I had Tatar friends and ethnic Kazakh friends and ethnic Russian friends and others. And I mean, for me, it's easy to identify. I identify most as a Croatian because I'm ethnically a Croat. And so I had friends there in Kazakhstan, let's say, who's Tatar. And I'm like, so are you Kazakh or Tatar? I'm like, well, I'm Kazakh because I grew up, I identify as a Kazakh citizen, or Russians in that sense, ethnic Russians who they would still say, well, they feel because they were born in Kazakhstan, they're kind of Kazakh citizens and they've never been to Russia. It's just, I mean, it's all fascinating. Do you have, is there any other issue you wanted to bring up, or any final thought for us, something else to mention regarding everything that's happened?
Well, the only thing is that I wish that that the wider world would care more about Central Asia, because that way we wouldn't be so surprised every time something happens there. I happen to live there, and I happen to report from there, and I happen to study the region. But what we saw, for example, in the media coverage of this emergency and this chaos was pretty stunningly bad. And so if I can appeal, I think we need more eyes on Central Asia. We need more journalists there. We need more a better presence of international organizations and international monitors for human rights, for example, because in that sense, this will also benefit Kazakhstan itself, to have for the world to have a better understanding of Kazakhstan and its beauties and its problems that can always be solved, because problems are there because we recognize them as problems because we know that they can be solved.
In talking about all of Asia, for me, I fell in love with Central Asia, which is why I went to go. I lived in Mongolia and I've lived in Kazakhstan, and for me, I don't know, there's just something special about Central Asia and all of that, the traditions, culture, and history there. So where are the best places for people to find your work?
I work for Global Voices, Open Democracy, The Diplomat. That's the ones that I contribute to most frequently. And yeah, that's most of my work is there.
All right. And people can also follow you on Twitter and LinkedIn. I'll include the links in the description. And what can I say? When you get back to Kazakhstan, continue enjoying the Bishparmak. Be safe out there. And, grazie for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Rahmet. Ciao.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast interview. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list through which you can receive an update of every new podcast, as well as a long list of key news headlines once a week. We're being heavily censored. YouTube has deleted some of our videos, and we currently have one strike. Patreon has terminated our account. Facebook has restricted our page, and Reddit has been deleting posts. Our favorite social media channels are Telegram and Twitter. The best places to watch the podcast beyond YouTube are on Odyssey, BitChute, and Brighteon. The best places to listen to the podcast are on SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, Google, or on any other podcast app. To help keep this podcast alive, leave a review on Apple Podcasts and wherever else. Subscribe to all our platforms and leave a donation if possible via Subscribestar, PayPal, Bitcoin, or Ethereum. You can also find us on MeWe, Minds, Gab, Float, VK, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Thanks for listening.